Minister Choe Son Hui has held talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin as the two countries move to further tighten strategic cooperation. Now, according to local media reports, the discussions focused on many future projects aimed at constantly strengthening and developing bilateral relations. Now, Choe has also delivered what reports called Kim Jong-un's brotherly regard to Putin. This visit comes amid growing international alarm over deepening military collaboration between Moscow and Pyongyang. Meanwhile, Western governments say that North Korea has provided Russia with artillery shells and personnel to support its war in Ukraine in exchange for advanced military technology. According to reports, Choe also met Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and both countries have now reached an agreement on all points during strategic talks on global issues in particular. With us on the broadcast is Professor Veselin Popovsky. He's a professor and vice dean at the Jindal Global Law School. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. At the outset, I wanted to understand from you what do you make of North Korea's helping hand to Russia. They've sent their troops on the ground. They're also providing artillery shells to Russia in Russia's war against Ukraine. What do you think North Korea stands to gain from this? Is it a bid to sort of legitimize the regime for the survival of Kim Jong-un's regime and cementing his status as a nuclear power?
Yeah, in everything you said. In addition to that, I will add that it's also the survival of Putin regime. Desperate meetings. Remember, after the cancellation of the meeting in Budapest between Donald Trump and Putin, the Russian diplomacy is really desperate to get anything on the news, and they sent Kirill Dmitriev to Washington, their Minister for Economic Cooperation, effectively trying to bribe some White House officials, but that ended in an absolute tragedy. Nothing came out of that. So the next is, well, that's the only last chance, I will put it this way. North Korea is the only country in the world that can still put Russia out of some isolation. And how we, in that context, we can see that meeting, which nothing surprising. North Korea used to be a long-term Russian friend. They, as you said, they supply not only equipment, but also soldiers. Effectively, Russia has still some money to buy some foreign assistance, and this is the North Korea, another similar dictatorial, brutal, criminal regime. And that's the only last chance for one criminal regime to buy some weapons and soldiers from another criminal regime. I would regard it simply in that way.
Indeed, and speaking of Putin itself, the equation between Russia and North Korea is a little bit different than with China as far as the war against Ukraine by Putin is concerned. Putin has chosen open cooperation with Pyongyang instead of strategic ambiguity. In China's case, China is not directly aiding the war, but indirectly it is providing raw materials, dual-use raw materials. Why do you think then North Korea is openly backing Putin and Putin has chosen this particular route?
You're absolutely right, Pia. Absolutely right. There is a big difference, in fact, between Pyongyang and Beijing here. North Koreans have also nothing to remain, they're nothing to lose. Their only friend in the world could be Russia and China to a certain extent. But Chinese are smarter. They don't want to associate themselves with Putin, who is losing the war, who is a war criminal, who will be remembered as the Hitler of the 21st century one day soon. And for that matter, Chinese are cautious. They don't, well, they still declare some friendship with Russia, and they supply some materials. Obviously, Chinese need money too. They are happy to buy Russian minerals and oil and gas, and also to supply some, but not military, not directly military equipments and technology to Russia. But over time, I expect China also to find additional alternative sources like India did. And Putin is more and more losing Xi Jinping as well over time. We see like with the meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, Putin is nowhere in any discussion anymore in that equation. So again, no good news for Putin whatsoever. He's gone very soon, I hope.
Indeed, and speaking about China as well, I just mentioned that China is sort of indirectly helping Russia. There is no direct transfer of any sort of defense equipment. As far as the international laws and norms are concerned, China is playing by the rule book, but it has used some sort of tactics such as its supply of fiber optic cables, supply of lithium-ion batteries, all of this which are used to manufacture fiber optic drones that are now being used by Russia against Ukraine on the front lines and to strike deeper into Ukrainian territory. What do you make of this?
Again, very discouraging, let's say, because you made a perfect analysis, Pia, that even if the support is indirect, it also implicates a country in supporting war crimes in Ukraine, and they happen daily, weekly. Many civilians continue to die in Ukraine, and obviously the Chinese trade with Russia is supportive of that. But you also mentioned something important, that kind of the international law doesn't prohibit that, and that's a big lacuna. That's something we need to fix. Imagine there were mandatory sanctions imposed by the United Nations Security Council where no single equipment, no single barrel of oil could be sold legally to Russia or from Russia. And that would be a different world. So if we have a proper international system to impose globally mandated sanctions on Russia, all of this would not happen. Then China need to violate international law daily, or any other country trading with Russia will need to explain why they violate international law daily by buying Russian products. That will be a different world. Unfortunately, we are not there yet.
Indeed, and one last question. Of course, a larger elephant in the room is the nukes, the nuclear weapons that North Korea possesses. We've seen historically China take a stance calling for disarmament, although this time when Kim Jong-un went to Beijing in the aftermath of the SCO summit, in the readout that had come out, China did not mention nuclear disarmament. This is now, of course, a key sticking point as far as the West is concerned. Russia, of course, has remained mum. Do you think that's one of the reasons why Kim Jong-un is now consistently aiming at escalating ties with Russia?
Absolutely. Again, you're absolutely right. You kind of ask rhetorical questions. You answer your question yourself, but you're absolutely right. The nuclear language always comes at the point where nothing else remains. And we see that in many Russian statements. When they see nothing else works, they start talking about Burevestnik and testing a nuclear missile a couple of days ago. And we see there's always, when the arguments end and there is nothing to say, and a country is isolated, then only it comes to nuclear weapons. But something important, by the way, here to differentiate between North Koreans and Russians. North Koreans mention nuclear weapons only as defensive, as a defensive system, whereas Russia, on the opposite, their statements often goes as to threaten even United States or United Kingdom. So the language between North Korean talking about nuclear weapons and the Russian talking about nuclear weapons is also very different. And for that matter, Russia remains the biggest threat to international peace and security of the century.
All right, Professor Veselin Popovsky, I'd like to thank you for taking out time, sharing your insights with us on NewsX World as we track these developments. Meanwhile, viewers, we're shifting our focus away from the North Korea-Russia equation towards what's happening in the Caribbean and Latin America. We're now learning that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has announced the suspension of an energy agreement with Trinidad and Tobago. This decision comes after the neighboring island nation welcomed a U.S. warship. In a recently televised address, Maduro has stated that his government had no option but to terminate the deal, citing Trinidad and Tobago's alignment with Washington. Listen in.
He aprobado la medida cautelar de suspensión inmediata de todos los efectos del acuerdo energético y de todo lo convenido en esa materia. Es una medida cautelar a la cual tengo potestad como presidente y he aprobado y he firmado. Suspendido todo. Y estoy elevando.
Additionally, Venezuela's Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello has criticized the U.S. military exercises taking place in Trinidad and Tobago and has further called the drills a deliberate provocation given the country's proximity to Venezuelan territory. Take a look.
Han decidido hacer unos ejercicios, supuestamente unos ejercicios militares, muy cerca del territorio venezolano. Es más, están así frente con frente, ya por Macuro, decidieron hacerlo ahí, teniendo tanto terreno, teniendo tanto terreno alrededor de Trinidad. ¿Por qué lo hacen ahí al frente? Porque es una provocación. Porque es una provocación. Porque quieren provocar a nuestro país. Y ayer salió un comunicado, ¿verdad?
Meanwhile, Venezuela's Vice President and Minister of Petroleum too has condemned Trinidad and Tobago's decision to allow U.S. military operations from its territory and has strongly stated that the Trinidadian government had chosen to align itself with the United States agenda, describing the move as a threat to regional stability. Take a look.
Estamos responsablemente proponiendo al jefe de Estado denunciarlo de manera inmediata y en consecuencia entren en suspensión todos los acuerdos gasíferos que mantiene Venezuela con Trinidad y Tobago.
This all comes as U.S. missile destroyer USS Gravely arrived in the port of Trinidad and Tobago yesterday in Spain, which is the capital of the country. Now, the warship is stationed just 10 kilometers from the Venezuelan coast. It is taking part in joint exercises with the Trinidadian Defense Forces. Meanwhile, Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister Kamla Persad Bissessar has rejected Venezuela's warning to halt a joint gas project over the U.S. warship's deployment. She stated that her government would not bow to pressure and remains committed to its cooperation with the United States in combating drug trafficking. The Foreign Minister of Trinidad and Tobago has meanwhile stated that the warship's presence demonstrates continued U.S. support in the Caribbean region. He's also stressed that his country maintains a stable and positive relationship with Venezuela, including through its diplomatic staff in Caracas. Take a look.
The U.S. being a superior power to Trinidad and Tobago, we will always look to see how best larger nations can help smaller ones like Trinidad and Tobago. And in this case, one of the things coming out of trade winds was that our TTDF, our naval capability, may not have been at optimum operating capacity. And so a request would have been made for assistance in that regard. The Gravely is here in furtherance of that request, and we welcome them being here. It demonstrates that the U.S. continues to be a very strong partner with Trinidad and Tobago.
With us on the broadcast is Mr. Ross Feingold, political analyst, joining us from Taipei. Thank you so much for taking out time and speaking to us on NewsX World. At the outset, I wanted to understand from you, what do you make of the statements that are coming out from Venezuela? Do you think their concerns are legitimate? They have highlighted that USS Gravely is stationed a mere 10 kilometers away from the Venezuelan coast. Of course, Trinidad and Tobago is a neighboring country. So what do you make of the rhetoric that the Maduro government and its officials are now using?
Your question was whether or not it's legitimate. The answer is no. Nothing coming from an illegitimate regime is going to be legitimate. However, politically, it's understandable why they would say these things. Of course, they're going to criticize any move by the United States that puts pressure on the Maduro regime, whether that's the recent military moves, sanctions, lining up other countries in the region to support the United States policy. So again, politically, it's understandable that they're going to lash out.
Indeed, and we've also seen a statement by the Trinidad and Tobago administration as well. They have emphasized that they will not accept any blackmail by the Maduro administration. We do know that Maduro has threatened the suspension of an energy agreement with the country itself. Trinidad and Tobago has reaffirmed its stance as far as supporting the United States is concerned, cooperating with the US is concerned as well. The question here obviously is, it is an independent sovereign country. So who is Venezuela exactly to question what Trinidad and Tobago really does?
Again, Venezuela is just going to lash out. It's going to lash out at the United States for its policies towards Venezuela. That's putting pressure on the regime. And Venezuela is going to lash out at any countries that are perceived as cooperating with the United States. But with regard to the latter statement, countries, especially smaller countries like Trinidad and Tobago, we have to be realistic. What choice do they have? If the Trump administration asks them or puts pressure on them to participate in measures to put pressure on the Maduro regime in Venezuela, then countries in the region, frankly, despite some exceptions, and there's some notable ones, but a lot of countries in the region are going to line up with the United States. That's just the reality. And Venezuela knows this, but what choice do they have then to try and score some propaganda points? But ultimately, complaining about what the United States does or complaining about what neighboring countries do, that's really not going to change the direction of the Trump administration's policies. If the Trump administration is willing to create a policy framework backed up with actions that puts pressure on the Venezuela regime, then they're going to have to deal with that reality.
Absolutely. As you mentioned, the rhetoric that we're seeing, the sort of propaganda that we're seeing is just tough talk by the Maduro administration. I want to understand from you, how does this really translate on the ground? Because we do know, for obvious reasons, it's the United States which has the upper hand.
Well, the challenge there is that, again, this is an illegitimate government. They basically ignored the election results. We know the public doesn't support the Maduro regime. But as long as they're willing to use force to repress their own people, they're like they might very well stay in power. They've stayed in power for literally decades by using these methods. So it's really up to the United States and its other partners to what extent they want to carry out this program to put pressure on the regime.
Indeed, I request you to stay on with us as we're tracking some other crucial developments at this time from Southeast Asia. The United States has emphasized that it expects Thailand and Cambodia to begin the immediate release of 18 detained Cambodian soldiers following a landmark ceasefire agreement signed by the two countries at the ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. The accord, which was witnessed and co-signed by US President Donald Trump, aims to formally halt the recent 5-day border conflict that left dozens dead and forced thousands and displaced them from their homes as well. Meanwhile, decades of border disputes have flared into the worst violence in recent years during the clashes in July along the 800-kilometer frontier. A senior US State Department official has stated that Washington's expectation is that the implementation of all commitments, including the release of these soldiers, should start as soon as possible. Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Ross Feingold. We've seen a landmark agreement being inked in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. I want to understand from you, because this clash, this sort of conflict along the border has been simmering now for decades. What we just witnessed is that genuine reconciliation, or at least an effort being made towards that, or some sort of a tactical pause by these countries?
I I think there's a genuine desire to resolve these differences. Neither country's leadership is eager for war. I don't think the people or even the militaries are eager for protracted fighting as well. There's an enormous amount of trade and people-to-people interaction. Both are highly integrated into the region for economic reasons, trade, tourism. Tourists from outside the region make trips to the region, visiting both places on a single trip. So I think all the stakeholders are highly incentivized to bring this to some kind of long-term resolution, and not just the stakeholders in Thailand and Cambodia, but the regional stakeholders as well. And that's one of the reasons why we saw ASEAN, under the leadership of Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, took such an active role in trying to end the fighting, although for strategic reasons, they've also brought in the United States and deferred to President Trump to take credit for the resolution. But again, ASEAN was heavily involved in bringing about a ceasefire as well. So I do think, and I hope this is more than just strategic, and that this is a pathway to a long-term solution.
Absolutely. Speaking of the US's involvement, Donald Trump's involvement in this particular deal that has been inked, how do you think it's gone down in China?
China is very friendly with both Cambodia and Thailand as well. So when I said just now that regional stakeholders were also highly incentivized to see a quick resolution, a ceasefire, and hopefully a long-term solution as well, I think China shares that view. China doesn't have any reason to hope that there's protracted tensions between countries with which it has very good relations, like Cambodia and Thailand. So I would expect China to be supportive of this process as well.
All right, with that said, I'd like to thank you for taking out time sharing your analysis with us on NewsX World. With that, viewers, we're shifting our focus to what's taking place